Hello, everybody. Welcome to tonight's edition of From the Boardroom to the Locker Room. And every time I think of a Friday before a Grand Prix, I think of Lando Norris going, hey, it's Friday and it is Grand Prix week. We're joined by our Formula One correspondent, Hendrik Verwoerd. Hendrik, welcome to the program. First time this year, and hope the first of many. How are you? And welcome to the show.
Hi, Louis. Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm very, very excited. It's been a very interesting off-season. Everything points to a fantastic season ahead of us. And now just a few days from now, we're going to see whether all the predictions are going to start to come true.
It seems as though every year we say it's going to be a better season, and it has been. Let's be perfectly honest. I mean, it's getting better and better. It's getting more and more competitive. The seasons are getting longer and longer, and we as fans are getting to enjoy it more and more.
Yeah, absolutely. I think last year we expected a very competitive season from the off, but then Max Verstappen and Red Bull dominated the first half of the season, almost the first, 10 races. Everybody thought, it's going to be much of the same. And then all of a sudden, virtually out of the blue, one could almost say, McLaren and Ferrari started to become very competitive, and the whole thing turned around. And the final half of the season last year was very exciting. Eventually, I think it was, if I can remember, 8 different drivers or 7 different drivers winning at least 2 races each.
Yeah.
So, everybody's hoping, and I think we are correct to hope that will continue from the start this time of the season. All 24 races are going to be very unpredictable.
Right, let's have a look at the team, shall we? And in no particular order except for the order that they finished last year. McLaren winning the Constructors' Championship, and I guess they really were by far the best team in terms of a team, with both drivers performing better than anybody else, hence how they ended top. They go into the season, I guess, as favourites, not only to once again win the Constructors' Championship, but this time bookmakers favourite Lando Norris along with Oscar Piastri. Norris is bookmakers' favourite.
They've also had a very good off-season test session in Bahrain. Very impressive, the long distance, the race distance runs that they did. I think justifiably are the favourites to start as a team. I think we're going to see a real fight between the two drivers. Last year, Lando, because of his seniority in the team, is more experienced than Oscar Piastri. At some points, he was given the number one status, although I think the team dropped the ball on a few occasions as well. They could have, I think, given him more support earlier in the season. But I think, they're starting from scratch, both of them, and Oscar Piastri is not the kind of guy who's going to sit back. I actually think that Oscar has got a stronger mental ability. He's mentally stronger than Lando Norris. It really seemed that Lando tends to, be very hard on himself, and he tends to, become depressed a little bit when things don't work out for him. Oscar just does not care. I mean, he's just so cool. And I think that factor alone, if they are going to be equally matched from the start, I think that's going to take Oscar to the front. I'm actually going to predict if one of the two of them is the world champion, I think it's going to be Piastri.
And I think Zach Brown's got the most difficult job of all the team principals, perhaps outside of Ferrari, because I guess, as you've already mentioned, he has 2 drivers who are both most certainly capable of winning the Drivers' Championship in 2025, unlike, as I said, besides Ferrari, where most of the other teams, you kind of know who the best driver in the team is going to be. And I guess if we go back in history, I suppose the closest to what we've got in a Norris and a Piastri is Hamilton and Kimi. I mean, perhaps not even Kimi, 1 or 2 other associations. Yeah, perhaps. And that, I think, is what might be the downfall, if you like, of McLaren by virtue of the fact that the 2 of them could end up taking each other off the track.
I'm pretty sure that Zach is going to, make sure that they're not going to take each other out. I don't think we're going to see a Senna-Prost situation for him. But what is danger for them, as far as the Drivers' Championship is concerned, is that the 2 drivers could take points off each other.
Yeah.
They get score the points for the team, and I think the team won't mind that too much. But for the Drivers' Championship, that's a danger for the 2 of them. And how that's going to be managed, it's a very difficult thing, because you do not want to, in a situation like that, have a number 1 and number 2 status. You want an equal number 1 status, but how do you manage that? We saw that with Mercedes also past with Lewis Hamilton and Nico Rosberg. Difficult to manage if both of them are in for a championship, for a title.
Yeah. Let me just correct myself. I meant Nico, not Kimi. But anyway, be that as it may, it was Lewis and Nico. But so let's move on, shall we, to the prancing horse. Historic year at Maranello. It's going to be so strange for those people who haven't yet seen it, and I'm sure everybody that loves Formula One has at one time or another in the last couple of months seen him in a red uniform. But to see Lewis Hamilton in that Ferrari reminds me of the days, as we all know, my hero, Nigel Mansell, climbing into that red Ferrari, and Michael Schumacher climbing into that red Ferrari. It's going to be emotional for him, I guess, and something that the fans are going to absolutely adore.
Well, I really hope that the Hamilton haters will come around, because he's now at the most iconic team in Formula One. He is arguably the most iconic driver, at least of the current generation, and the combination is a dream combination. It really is a dream combination. They've got one goal, and that's Hamilton and Ferrari. That is to win the Drivers' Championship for Lewis, obviously the Team's Championship, the Constructors' Championship for Ferrari. They haven't won that since, I think, 2008. But Lewis Hamilton feels that there's unfinished business, and I think quite rightly so. He was robbed of the 2021 title to make it his 8th and record-setting 8th title, and I think, he feels that he's owed that. I think justifiably so, personally. And wouldn't it be fantastic if he can actually achieve that in a Ferrari? The team that he has admitted to always dreaming of driving for. In fact, most drivers probably want to drive for Ferrari at some point. But, he's at that stage in his career where he's got to now finish the job before he retires. He's 40 years old starting this season. A new rules dispensation coming for everybody next year. So this is probably his one and only chance to achieve, that milestone of record 8th Drivers' Championship this year.
He goes into a team that's got a Monegascan who's, I guess, flattered to deceive in a way. I mean, we thought at the beginning of his career, and when he got into Ferrari, he might be a little, not better, but have better results than he's got. I guess he's having sleepless nights, maybe, knowing that he's got a 7-time world champion that's come into the team. Normally, you get guys that come into the team who are less famous or less of a record than you, and he's not going to take a back seat, is he?
Well, no, I wouldn't expect him to. He is very quick, Charles Leclerc. I mean, there's no question about it that he's at least on a one-lap pace. He is probably the quickest of the lot. In other words, in terms of qualifying pace, he's probably the quickest of the lot in the entire field. But he tends to make mistakes in the race. Yes, in the past, some of the mistakes did come from Ferrari's strategy errors and stuff like that. But he tended in the past to sometimes crash when it wasn't necessary for him to push that hard in a race. That's a little bit of a weakness, I think, in Charles. Lewis certainly doesn't have that kind of a weakness. He doesn't make mistakes, generally, and he doesn't make stupid mistakes. So I think, Lewis will come in. He's obviously going to take a while to get used to the way that the car handles on the edge and in racing conditions. I don't think it's going to take too long for him, thanks to his experience. He's also obviously got to get to know how the team works, because the team's, culture, the working culture is completely different at Ferrari than with a Mercedes environment that he's been used to almost for decades now. So, it's going to take a while. I'm not sure that he's going to win first time out like Ilione did, but that is possible. That is completely possible. So that is a fascinating situation to watch out this year.
Yeah, you talk about the team mistakes. They made a few last season, and I guess Lewis will not allow them to make too many this season. Right, Max Verstappen, world champion, is joined by Liam Lawson, the New Zealander, looking to become just the second driver after the great Michael Schumacher to win 5 titles in a row. No more Adrian Newey there, although I guess the car hasn't changed that much and won't change that much until next season. But I guess he goes into the season with less controversy than he did last season, which didn't necessarily surround him, but surrounded his boss. And he is a father for the first time, although he has kind of like been a stepfather for a few years. Does that take the edge off, you think, Hendrik?
No, I don't think so. I think Max doesn't allow anything to take the edge off. He's going to be as hard as he's always been. I think he's going to be involved in a number of incidents on the track this year as well, because I think he's going to be under much more pressure during races from other competitors. I don't think that he's going to be dominant, obviously, as he was last year, because the car has been a bit of a problem for them, and they didn't have a very good Bahrain testing session either. They couldn't get the car to work to widen the operating window, so to speak. They had a very narrow operating window last year. Max still made the most out of it, though, but they needed to widen the operating window. The car, the performance, the handling of the car needs to be a little bit more pliable. And the dark horse, of course, in that team is Liam Lawson. The question is he going to be able to match Max? Is he going to be able to beat him? I cannot see him beating him, but Liam Lawson as a New Zealander, those guys are hard-nosed also. He tends to drive Liam with his elbows out. We've seen that on a number of occasions in the 6 races that he did stand in last year. So, he's also not going to be lying down and just taking it easy, although I cannot really see him on an equal footing to Max, at least not in the first half of the season.
Well, if you look at the history of Red Bull, particularly in the last 5 seasons or so, and you think of the drivers that have tried to come up against Max and where they've all ended up, and every one of them has been either kicked out the team or demoted to a lower team. Poor Sergio Perez, I mean, how much better is Lawson than Perez? And I guess we'll find out if it's the driver or the effect of having to drive in a team with somebody like Max.
Yeah, Max tends to break his teammates, doesn't he? Mentally.
Yeah.
He completely breaks them. That's the way of, and the guy who comes in must understand that is who he's up against, that entire team is built around Max, understandably so, obviously. Even to the extent that Max's father plays a role in that team, which is completely different from anybody else.
Yeah.
It's something I personally cannot understand, that Christian Horner, the team boss, actually allows Jos Verstappen, the father, to play such a big role in his driver. But of course, if that works for Max, then it works for the team. So that's why he's allowing that. But no other father plays such a big role in any Formula One team.
I remember seeing a clip, I don't know, must have been 8-9 years ago, of Lewis pulling into the pits and pulling into the wrong garage. I wonder if the McLaren team are going to be wondering if he's going to do that this year. I mean, he's been driving into that pit lane so often. George Russell and Andrea Kimi Antonelli. I think George Russell is extremely underrated. I think he certainly could be a dark horse if that Mercedes can perform to the level that we know it can.
Yes, and Mercedes did have a very good testing session in Bahrain. So the indications are that car is now, probably going to be more, again, compliant with what the drivers want, because it was very unpredictable in terms of handling it. When the driver would come into a corner, he didn't know what the rear end would do, what the front end would do going through the corner, depending on conditions, whether it's cool or hot. Those sort of unpredictable elements made the car very difficult to drive last year. George is now rising to the number 1 position, effectively the number 1 position. Kimi comes in as the rookie, much like Lewis Hamilton did in 2007 at McLaren. And, I think some people are expecting, I will not be surprised if Kimi does, in fact, do exactly what Lewis did in Australia in 2007, the first race, and he overtook his much more senior teammate, Fernando Alonso, into the first corner after the start.
Yeah.
So I will not be surprised if Kimi does the same with George. But George, of course, has got much more experience. Kimi has not, he's driven a Formula One car in various conditions, but obviously in testing, but not in racing conditions. That's one of the question marks. How is Kimi going to match? Is he going to be able to match George? Is George going to be maybe would he, not probably, may he even lose out to Kimi? Is Kimi as good as people say he is? That's all to be proven this year. So, that's another interesting situation. And Mercedes certainly a dark horse in terms of the championship this year. If that car is competitive, certainly I think George and Kimi would be able to use that car to good effect and to make it a championship challenger this season.
And one of the things to watch out for, and I don't want to be that guy that hypes something up that's not really there, but it is there. I mean, there's certainly no love lost between George Russell and Max Verstappen.
Absolutely not. And even off track. I mean, most of the guys get along quite well off track too. But even off track, it seems that George and Max do not get along, and certainly on track they do not give each other an inch. And George has stated, he stated absolutely, he's not going to allow Max to bully him. He's going to stand up to Max, and if it happens, well, in some of the races, he's going to not just allow Max to bully him. So that's what I mean. I think Max is going to be involved in a number of similar kind of incidents that he was involved in last year, mostly with Lando Norris. But this year, I think he's going to be involved with similar situations with the likes of Hamilton and Leclerc and George and Kimi and so on. So, and one thing that we need to understand also is that Max is, in terms of penalty points, in a very precarious situation at the moment. Got a number of penalty points against him, and if he gets up to 12, he will face a race ban. So he's actually got to be a little bit more careful, because most of those points, and I don't have that number in front of me, I think it's up to 8 or something like that. Most of those points only expire, I think, by the midpoint of the season.
Yeah.
So, that is something that Max certainly needs to take into account.
And he's going to have to watch his language this year as well. You're listening to the edition of From the Boardroom to the Locker Room. We'll have more for you after these. Hi, I'm Louis Karpas. Going into this weekend, it is Six Nations rugby action, and any one of three teams mathematically can still win the Six Nations. France top the log, England a second, and Ireland a third. None of them play each other, so it's going to be a weekend of outstanding Six Nations rugby to discuss all the permutations and chat about how France have improved, how perhaps Ireland have declined, and how England might even come through the back door. Chat to Andy Capistania, the next edition of From the Boardroom to the Locker Room. Join us then. Right, let's move on to Aston Martin. 43-year-old, evergreen, as fresh as ever. You mentioned him when he was joined by Lewis Hamilton. Fernando Alonso and Lance Stroll in the Aston Martin. Adrian Newey's influence, I guess, won't really show much in this season, but most probably 2026. But still an influential guy in the pit lane, and perhaps even somebody who might have an influence over Lance Stroll's career in this season and going further into the seasons in years to come.
Yeah, I think Aston is in a very precarious situation this year. Yes, they've got Adrian Newey, but as you correctly point out, he's not going to have much of an influence on the current car, the AMR 25. He's focused on the AMR 26 next year, when the entire car changes. Both the power unit and the chassis will change next year for everybody. So he's focused on that, Adrian Newey. I think the team will probably, see how it goes for the first few races, and then change their focus to next season. That's a kind of a dilemma that most of the teams have, if not all of the teams. How much of their resources do they use for competitive purposes for this season, and how much of their available resources, because everybody, of course, is under a budget cap, how much of that do they then focus on the 2026 project? And in terms of the 26 project, I think for Aston Martin, Lawrence Stroll, the father, the owner of the team, will need to make some decision at some point. If he wants his team to win the World Championship, he's got to get rid of his son. At some point, he's got to get rid of Lance, because Lance is not really, contributing much, has not really been contributing very much. With Aston Martin, still Fernando Alonso is still contracted for next year, as is Lance, obviously, but that can be broken. So with Fernando Alonso, with Adrian Newey, I cannot see how Lawrence can justify keeping his son in that team and not getting a stronger driver that can score points for the team, because that is obviously the ambition that Lawrence has for his team to become contenders for the World Championship starting next year with a new dispensation. So this year, I think, is going to be much of a preparation for next year for Aston Martin, trying to be competitive in terms of the championship.
So barring Aston Martin, all the other teams most certainly, I guess, could win a Grand Prix. And maybe Aston Martin and Fernando Alonso could on a wet track maybe, or luck can go his way, safety car, whatever.
Yeah.
But for the rest, I doubt we're going to see a driver win out of the rest of the team, starting with Alpine. Jack Doohan, the Australian, and Pierre Gasly, the two members. Gasly will be the clear team favourite after Esteban Ocon moved to Haas. He does need to deliver now, does Gasly, and he needs to keep that car on track and not bash into anybody.
Well, he doesn't have Ocon next to him, so he's probably not going to be in a position where he's going to possibly crash against his team. Jack Doohan is under pressure, though, because he's Flavio Briatore, who's the main guy basically at Alpine, even above team principal. He's the advisor to the board, to the Renault board, basically, as far as their Formula One project is concerned. He has already said that Jack Doohan needs to produce the goods, otherwise they're going to exchange him for Franco Colapinto. That's the Argentinian that made such a big impression towards the end of last season, driving for Williams when he replaced Logan Sargent. He hasn't got a drive, but he's a reserve driver for Alpine this year. He's Colapinto, and he is looming large, throwing a large shadow over Jack Doohan. If Jack Doohan does not produce the goods in the first few races, then I'm pretty sure Flavio is going to say, okay, that's it, we draw the line, and we're going to give Franco Colapinto the opportunity. So that is another theme that we need to look out for. How is Jack Doohan doing? Son, obviously, of Mick Doohan. So he, as I said, he's under pressure. Pierre Gasly is established in that team, and he's reckoning that they can actually challenge for the podium this year. We'll have to wait and see. I think there's going to be a much more stable environment in the Alpine team this year, unlike last year when you saw a lot of people getting fired and getting moved around and resigning. So this year, I think they're going to start off more stably. Is that a word? Stably.
Yes, stabilized, whatever.
Yes, and so that should be a good foundation for them for the season.
So let's move on to Haas, the only team with a brand new driver lineup. Esteban Ocon, as we mentioned, is going to be, I guess, still next to Gasly in one way or another, but in a different uniform and a different colored car, along with Olivier Bierman, who did so brilliantly well when he stepped in as a replacement last season. And for me, surprisingly, although I guess if you get an opportunity to take a drive in a Formula One car on a permanent basis, you go wherever you can into the Haas car. I know there's still a connection with Ferrari, but I suppose once Lewis Hamilton was going there, he knew there was no chance of that, and he's decided to go with Haas.
Well, yeah, I think, he's a rookie, so I don't think he had much of a chance to get to the senior team. But anyway, yes, he was very, very impressive when he stood in for Carlos Sainz at the beginning of last season when Sainz had the medical issue in Saudi Arabia. And he also stood in at Haas for Kevin Magnussen at some point last season. So Ollie Bierman is a very, very impressive youngster. His results in junior categories are very impressive, and the few occasions that he's had in Formula One also were very impressive. I think he's going to be one of the surprises of the season. I expect him to give Esteban Ocon a very, very good run for his money, and I expect the relationship between the two of them to sour very early in the season as well. Esteban is notorious for not maintaining good relationships with his teammates, and Ollie is not going to stand back. He knows he's got an impression to make, and he's got the ability to do that. I can really see a clash between teammates at Haas this season. I think that team is also going to be a bit of a surprise because they were very measured in their test in Bahrain. They didn't try to do a glory lap or set any record or whatever. They worked on the basics like they did last year, and I think they're going to be much more competitive in the midfield this season.
So they were known as Scuderia Toro Rosso, then Scuderia AlphaTauri, then RB, and now Racing Bulls in 2025. I mean, goodness me, how many name changes can you have? And Yuki Tsunoda's still there, and Isaac Hadjar, the Frenchman, has come into that side, to that team. Nice to see a Frenchman back in Formula One.
Yeah, he's joining the other Frenchman also, but the new Frenchman always is a good sign for Formula One. He's a Formula 2 champion, and he's going to, I think, be another surprise of the season, although, it's going to take a lot to impress against Yuki Tsunoda, who's proven to be extremely fast in that team and well established in that team. Just one point there, as far as the team name is concerned, Louis. Something that I think, often the marketing people don't think about. You mentioned the different names. Yeah, there's always, last year, some people even called that team the V-Carb team, which is completely crazy. But RB worked for them. But what are they going to do for the commentators? The team's name basically is the Racing Bulls, right? Plural. So a plural name for a team. What do you call the car that they are driving? The commentator says, there goes Yuki Tsunoda in a Racing Bulls. That doesn't work, does it? I mean, they've got to call it a Racing Bull, certainly, obviously the car, the individual car. So I think the marketing people, again, didn't think this one through properly. You've got the Red Bull, that works. So you can drive in a Red Bull car, but you cannot drive in a Racing Bulls car.
Yes. It's your commentator background coming out.
Yes. Absolutely. People don't think about that quite often. But anyway, I think that's also going to be an interesting situation there with a rookie against the veteran.
Williams seem to be improving season after season. Carlos Sainz there now, and Alex Albon. I think that's a great driver combination.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned some teams that will not win this year. I think we're going to see one or two surprises, and I'm going to predict that Carlos Sainz is actually going to win a race this year in a Williams. It will probably not be in normal conditions. I think Carlos has got the ability that in wet conditions or changeable conditions, and depending on how people's strategies work out and whatever, that he has got the ability to take that car and to actually win it. I'm not going to put money on it, obviously, but I'm going to predict that as a surprise, Carlos Sainz could win in the Williams this year. And it's going to be interesting again, the combination between the two of them, Alex Albon and Carlos Sainz, the same generation of drivers. They all grew up together. They know each other very well. They get along very well off track. And Albon is not a slow coach at all, but he also tends to be a little bit emotional sometimes. And Carlos, is, let's call it mentally a little bit stronger between the two of them. And, how is Alex going to accept Carlos as, the better between the two of them? I expect that's what's going to happen. So the dynamic between the two teammates is also going to be interesting.
And then Sauber, the last team on the grid for 2025, waiting to become Audi. Nico Hülkenberg and Gabriel Bortoleto, Brazilian, back in the side, in the team. Great once again to see a Brazilian, and I'm sure when they go to Brazil, he will have huge support, and he'll realize what it's like to race a car for his country. They're going to be keeping up the back of the grid, aren't they?
Yes, I think they are. I think the focus of that team at the moment is on 2026 when they become the Audi factory team, and I don't think that it makes any sense for them at all to throw a lot of resources into trying to get competitive and to get off their 10th position from last year. They're going to probably finish 10th and then hope to be much better in 2026. Let's also not forget in 2026 we've got Cadillac coming in, so
yes.
that's also somebody that they need to look out for their planning. But Bortoleto, a very highly regarded youngster from Brazil, as you say, and Nico Hülkenberg, a personal favorite of mine. I met him on a number of occasions when he raced in the A1 GP series for Germany. Very impressive, and he completely dominated when he was in that series. Maybe not against very strong opposition, but anyway, at that point we already knew, this is like the early 2000s, we already knew that he's headed to Formula One. But he's always been unlucky. He's always been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Because I think his abilities, his talent, he should have already been in a top team, and he should have probably already have won at least one race. So that is, I think, as good as Nico Hülkenberg is. I think he's the right driver for this team to take this team further, to lead them into a situation where they could maybe join, the midfield as Audi next year, although I think that's very ambitious.
And if you're looking for the most outrageous outside bets at a bookmaker that you could ever imagine and put a rand down and get most probably 500 to 1, he's got the most number of starts without ever standing on a podium. I told you on this program, put a rand on him getting onto the podium. You'll get an absolutely unbelievable set of odds for that. Australia, this weekend, Hendrik, it's always a race that is unpredictable going forward. Australians don't often stand on the podium. Perhaps this is an opportunity with Piastri and Doohan to end that Australian Grand Prix curse. Can they maybe get onto that podium? Because no drivers officially stood on the podium at Albert Park after Mark Webber's debut in 2002, Daniel Ricciardo's heartbreak in 2014, and perhaps Piastri's home curse. Two of them there. Can one of them, do you think, stand on the podium?
I don't think Doohan is going to be on the podium. It's going to take something really special for him to be able to do that. But I think it's a very, very good chance that Oscar Piastri could be on the podium and even win this race. Although, having said that, it seems the weather predictions are telling us that it's going to be a very, very interesting race from the weather perspective. There's a very strong chance of rain and even heavy rain on Sunday during the race. Apparently, there's some weather system that's making its way towards Melbourne. So the weather could play a huge role, and maybe even my prediction of a Carlos Sainz victory could come true in Australia this weekend. But we're off at a canter as far as the season is concerned. We've got a double header this weekend, the Australian Grand Prix, the following weekend the Chinese Grand Prix with a sprint. It's a sprint weekend in China as well. So a double header to start of the season. I cannot wait.
Lovely stuff. Hendrik Verwoerd, thank you so much for joining us. We will be talking to you through the course of the season. Hey, it's nearly with us. This weekend, the start of the 2025 75th anniversary of Formula One motor racing, and we'll be bringing you all the action in our preview show on Friday evening, our review show on Monday, and as we go through the year. That's tonight's edition of From the Boardroom to the Locker Room as we rev our engines towards 2025's Formula One season. As always, be nice to each other. Until next time, bye for now.